In the mid-20th century, Americans were joining together, participating in community events, and trusting as never before. Neighbors bowled together in local bowling alley community leagues, turned out at the polls, and joined local PTA meetings, and trusted institutions at least to some degree. Over the last 2 generations, that robust civic life quietly collapsed. Harvard sociologist Robert D. Putnam documented this decline in his book, Bowling Alone: The Collapse and Revival of American Community. By virtually every measure, American community engagement plummeted in the late 20th century. Voter turnout fell by nearly 1/4 from the 1960s to 1990. Millions of citizens who once took part in the simplest act of democracy simply stopped showing up at the polls. Attending public meetings on local affairs dropped by more than 1/3 between 1973 and 1993, from 22% of Americans down to 13%. Participation in rallies, committees, and local organizations saw similar steep declines. Membership in civic and fraternal groups collapsed. Traditional women's clubs lost over half their members since the 1960s, and stalwarts like the League of Women's Voters shrank by 42%. Mainstream volunteer organizations struggled too. The Red Cross had 61% fewer volunteers in 1990 than in 1970, and Boy Scouts volunteers fell by 1/4. Classic fraternal lodges such as the Lions, Elks, Shriners, Masons all saw memberships drop 12% to 40% in recent decades. Even America's favorite pastime illustrates the change. More Americans are bowling than ever, but league bowling dropped 40% between 1980 and 1993. People still bowl, but they are increasingly choosing to bowl alone, forsaking the league nights that once brought communities together over beer and pizza. Those casual conversations at the bowling alley, a small but real form of civic glue, have been lost. The trend was broad and unmistakable. After rising for the first 2/3 of the 20th century, social capital, the fabric of connections and trust that holds a society together, went into a sudden freefall starting in the 1970s. By the late 1990s, by virtually every conceivable measure, social capital had eroded steadily and sometimes dramatically over the past 2 generations. Putnam reported Americans withdrew not just from bowling leagues and clubs, but from each other. Trust in our institutions and in each other also waned. In the 1960s, roughly 70% of Americans said they trusted the federal government to do what is right most of the time. In the early 1990s, only about 25% did. Today, that number stands near 22%. Likewise, 45% of Americans in 1972 said that most people could be trusted, but in 2016, only around 30% feel this way. In surveys today, a record high 80% of U.S. adults say Americans are greatly divided in their core values. Only around 18% feel the country is even somewhat united. This means only one thing, that the social fabric has frayed. So why did this happen? Putnam's research pointed to several factors. Generational change was the biggest driver. The civically engaged World War II-era generations were replaced by later generations with looser community ties. Other contributors included time pressures, such as busier two-income households, urban sprawl, which resulted in longer commutes and more isolation, and especially television. Television in the late 20th century pulled people indoors and turned communal activities into solitary screen time. An average American by 1990 was watching hours of TV alone each day rather than joining group activities. This accounted for perhaps 1/4 of the social capital decline, Putnam estimated. He famously argued that these losses mattered. Communities with rich social bonds enjoy safer neighborhoods, healthier and happier citizens, and a more responsive government. When people trust each other and meet face to face, collective problems are easier to solve. Conversely, as social capital evaporates, society fragments. The I overshadows the we. Problems fester in the absence of cooperation. By the year 2000, America had become, in Putnam's metaphor, a nation bowling alone. We were more isolated, less involved, and less trusting than our parents or grandparents had been. Still, at the dawn of the 21st century, some new forces were just emerging, forces that would accelerate these trends in ways that few could have predicted. As community halls sat empty and Rotary clubs shrank, a new digital realm promised to reconnect us online. And what could possibly go wrong with that? The internet arrived as a marvel, a new frontier with the promise of unlimited connection and information. By the early 2000s, Americans were flocking online. Social media platforms like Facebook, founded in 2004, and Twitter, founded in 2006, appeared, pledging to bring the world closer together. And for a time, it seemed they did. We could reconnect with old classmates, share photos with family across the country, debate strangers on message boards. By 2011, about half of US teens were using social media daily. By 2017, 85% were. And by 2022, an astonishing 95% of teens reported using some form of social media. Adults, too, migrated en masse to digital networks for news and social life. The physical face-to-face interactions that had been waning were replaced, or so we thought, by likes, shares, and comments. As we learned to embrace this always online life, something else was beginning to happen. Rather than uniting the nation into one global village, the internet splintered our reality into 1,000 micro-communities and echo chambers. The same technology that connected us also divided us. In theory, the internet gave us all access to the same information. In practice, joining a community and choosing what information to accept or reject became a matter of opinion. Major social media apps have become ubiquitous channels through which people consume information and connect, or fail to connect, with each other. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube have billions of users. They shape how we receive news and interact daily, driven by algorithms designed to maximize engagement. In the early days of social media, feeds were mostly chronological and filled with personal updates. But around 2009 to 2012, the platforms pivoted to algorithmic ranking, showing each user the posts most likely to keep them interested, or rather addicted, rather than just a simple timeline. Facebook's introduction of the like button in 2009, and later the array of reaction emojis, were turning points. Engagement, such as clicks, likes, shares, comments, became the currency of the realm. The algorithms learned that provocative and emotionally charged content generates more engagement. Before long, the juicy stuff floated to the top of everyone's feed. Each of us started to receive a customized reality, filtered by both our clicks and preferences. A liberal college student might see mostly progressive news and commentary in her feeds, while her conservative uncle saw an entirely different news universe of right-leaning posts. As author Eli Pariser famously warned in The Filter Bubble, personalized algorithms invisibly tailor our information diet to what we're already likely to click, often reinforcing our existing biases. If I'm a conservative, I click on stories that flatter my views. If I'm a liberal, I click on different stories, and soon the algorithm shows us only content that confirms those pre-existing beliefs. We each wind up enclosed in a filter bubble, an information ecosystem custom built for one. What's outside that bubble gets filtered out. A healthy democracy depends not on everyone thinking the same, but everyone knowing roughly the same facts. That shared baseline of information has become a casualty of the digital age. Consider an example. Person A's online feed is full of factual reports about NASA's Apollo 11 moon landing, while Person B only sees conspiratorial moon landing hoax videos. Now put A and B in the same room. How can they even have a civil conversation when each thinks the other's evidence is fabricated? In the algorithmic Wild West of online media, such divergent realities proliferate. A 2019 study noted that this state of isolated, non-overlapping beliefs has increasingly become the norm. At the same time, the tone of our online interactions has degraded. Behind our screens, we often behave in ways we never would face-to-face. Psychologists call it the online disinhibition effect, the loss of restraint and empathy when communicating online compared to in person. Freed by the anonymity or the distance of a screen, ordinary people can turn shockingly toxic. Cruel insults, threats, and harassment have become commonplace on comment threads and social media posts. Researchers identify factors like dissociative anonymity, the idea of "you don't know me," and empathy deficits that contribute to this phenomenon. In plain terms, people feel safer saying things online that they never would say in person, because online there are fewer immediate consequences. The result is toxic disinhibition, an eruption of flaming and hate that corrodes civil discourse. If early television turned us into passive consumers, social media turned us into performative combatants. The loudest, angriest voices get the most attention. Nuanced debate and mutual understanding struggle to compete with the spectacle of outrage. In this digital Wild West, rumor and misinformation also thrive. Lies often spread faster than truth. A famous MIT analysis found that false news on Twitter travels significantly farther and faster than accurate news. Extreme or emotionally charged content, even if false, triggers those all-important clicks and shares. And the platform's own incentives amplified the problem. In 2018, Facebook made a pivotal change to its newsfeed algorithm aimed at increasing meaningful social interactions on the platform. In practice, this meant posts attracting lots of reactions and comments would be shown more, but Facebook's internal memos revealed that employees knew this change tended to boost outrage and misinformation. The algorithm's scoring system gave 5 times more weight to an angry reaction on a post rather than just a regular like. Expectedly, posts that enraged people, including violent, toxic, or false content, began to dominate feeds. Facebook's own documents later revealed the 2018 algorithm change rewarded outrage, elevating divisive, sensational posts while throttling more even-tempered content. One engineer warned that the platform was becoming an increasing liability for civic discourse. Similar dynamics play out across social media. What gets rewarded by the algorithms is content that hooks our attention, often by provoking anger, fear, or zeal. A recent University of Michigan study confirms that social media algorithms reward and amplify attacks precisely because they're engaging, making outrage more visible and giving users a warped view of what others think. If you scroll through your feed and see a constant torrent of hostility, you come away thinking, wow, everyone is angry and extreme. Indeed, the study found that people who rely on social media as their main news source more likely perceive politics as hostile and angry. It's a vicious cycle. The more toxic content we consume, the more cynical and distrustful we become. By the late 2010s, America's digital public square had become an unruly, rage-inducing place. Our shared reality was splintering. Different groups not only had different opinions, but entirely different sets of facts and news. Online anonymity and group tribalism also fostered de-individuation, individuals subsumed into mobs, losing their sense of personal responsibility. In heated online group conflicts, people would say or do things they never contemplate alone. Studies have found that this anonymity-fueled group mindset can drive greater opinion polarization and extremism in online communication. Despite early hopes that the internet might increase understanding, the data told a more sobering story. Despite unprecedented access to information, Americans did not become more enlightened or united. In many ways, we became more polarized and misinformed. A 2020 Pew survey found 74% of US adults believed social media's effect on how things are going in the country was negative. Only 25% said it was positive. And yet, even as this digital dysfunction was emerging, few fully grasped its implications. Tech companies insisted they were merely platforms and not responsible for what users posted or how it affected society. For a while, we accepted that bargain, connecting with everyone on platforms governed by no one. The internet frontier remained largely unregulated, its algorithms opaque. By the end of the 2010s, cracks in our shared reality were visible, but the rupture was about to be blown wide open by an even more profound event. If you're not paying for it, you're not the customer, you're the product being sold. This adage became the mantra of the internet age. All those free services we eagerly adopted, search engines, social networks, apps, were not truly free. We paid with our personal data and our attention. In the 2010s, a handful of tech corporations perfected a new business model. Harvard professor Shoshana Zuboff called it surveillance capitalism, an economic system built on harvesting human experience as raw data, then using it to predict and shape our behavior for profit. But what does that mean? Every time we click, scroll, or pause online, we emit data points. Tech companies track it all: the videos you watch, the posts you like, how long you hover on an image, your location, your shopping history, how fast you type. This personal data, much of it gathered without our full awareness, is analyzed to infer remarkably detailed profiles of each user. The algorithms predict what you might do or buy next, and then they act on those predictions, deciding which ad or content to show you, nudging your behavior in subtle ways. Zuboff described it bluntly: we have allowed private companies to spy on every aspect of our lives online, and in turn they use that information not only to predict our behavior, but to influence and modify it. Our clicks and preferences are bought and sold in an unfettered marketplace for influence. And it has made some of those companies the richest in history. In 2022, Google and Meta, Facebook's parent company, together raked in about $281 billion in advertising revenue. Online ad spending hit overall $567 billion globally. Why such astronomical sums? Because targeted digital advertising, fueled by surveillance of users, works. If a platform knows you just search for new sneakers, it can sell that insight to shoe companies who will bombard you with sneaker ads. If it knows you tend to engage with conspiracy theories, it can promote extreme content that keeps you hooked and shows you ads along with it. Your attention is the commodity, and it's being sold to the highest bidder. Zuboff calls this a coup from above, a wholesale capture of human behavior by corporations, done largely without our informed consent. Global tech firms like Google and Facebook enticed us with convenience and connection, and in exchange we gave up our privacy on a massive scale. She and others argue that this surveillance economy is an assault on our autonomy and democracy. After all, if companies or governments can use our data to manipulate what we see and how we feel, our ability to make free, informed choices is undermined. It's not just about selling shoes, it's about selling ideas, even false or harmful ones. We saw a stark example of this with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. In 2018, it came to light that Cambridge Analytica, a political consulting firm, had surreptitiously harvested data from up to 87 million Facebook users without their consent. This trove included information on people's personalities, likes, and networks. The firm then used that data to micro-target political ads and misinformation during elections, including the 2016 US presidential campaign. Essentially, a shadowy company built psychological profiles on tens of millions of Americans, gleaned from their innocent Facebook quizzes and likes, and then attempted to sway their votes with tailored propaganda. It was a wake-up call. Our personal data can and will be weaponized in the wrong hands. And it's not just rogue firms like Cambridge Analytica. State actors jumped in too. Russian operatives famously exploited social media in 2016, creating fake profiles and pages to spread divisive content and conspiracy theories to American audiences. One U.S. Senate investigation found that in the lead-up to the 2016 election, Russian troll farms had a potential reach of 126 million users on Facebook, with content designed to inflame anger and tribalism. The digital Wild West allowed foreign powers to meddle in our shared reality with ease. So why were the platforms so vulnerable to abuse? Because outrage and fear were good for business. The more outrageous the content, the more engagement, and thus the more ad revenue. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and others at first took a hands-off stance. They wouldn't police truth or civility too strictly because viral content, even if false, kept users glued to the screen. It was only after scandals and public pressure that they began feebly cracking down on blatant disinformation and hate speech. Inside the tech companies, some voices of conscience sounded alarms. Facebook's own researchers ran experiments showing they could manipulate users' emotions by tweaking the content of their feeds, literally causing a massive-scale emotional contagion by showing some users mostly negative posts and others mostly positive posts. When this 2014 study became public, it raised an unsettling question. If Facebook can subtly make users sad or angry, what else can they do? The answer is quite a lot. Documents later leaked by whistleblowers like Frances Haugen showed that Facebook understood how its algorithms spread polarization and misinformation, but often resisted or watered down fixes that might reduce engagement metrics. Growth and profit were thus prioritized over social responsibility. By the end of the 2010s, surveillance capitalism had transformed the information landscape. We were no longer just figuratively or literally choosing to bowl alone. We were scrolling alone, each in our own feed under the algorithm's gaze. Our data was being monetized in countless ways invisible to us. As Zuboff writes, it was an expropriation of critical human rights. Our privacy, our ability to think and choose freely were suddenly for profit. Yet most users felt helpless to change it. Who could opt out? Refusing social media or the convenience of Google in modern life is like opting out of society. And regulators, especially in the US, were slow and timid in reining in big tech. For years, tech CEOs assured that everything was under control. But cracks were showing. Election scandals, data breaches, the viral spread of conspiracies. These were symptoms of a deeper breakdown. By 2020, America was like a dry forest, long plagued by social drought and increasingly littered with the kindling of digital disinformation. All it needed was a spark. In that year, the spark came, a once-in-a-century crisis that forced our lives entirely online and pushed an already divided society to the brink. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic swept the world. Overnight, the rhythms of daily life were disrupted. Schools and workplaces were shut down, and stay-at-home orders confined people to their homes. The only windows to the outside world were suddenly electronic. For months on end, human contact was mediated by screens, if it happened at all. Grandparents had to learn how to use Zoom. Friends held virtual game nights. Office meetings moved to video chats. Our already digital society went almost fully digital, accelerating trends that might have taken years into a matter of weeks. The social effects were profound. America, already experiencing a loneliness crisis, became more isolated than ever. One nationwide study found that during the pandemic lockdowns, people's social networks shrunk by 16% in just 1 year, from June 2019 to June 2020. Time spent alone, already on the rise for decades, jumped dramatically. By 2020, Americans were spending on average an extra 24 hours per month alone compared to 2003, which translates to about an extra 5.5 hours extra a day alone. Meanwhile, time spent socializing with friends in person, which had already been steadily declining, absolutely cratered. For younger people ages 15 to 24, in-person social time dropped nearly 70% over the past 2 decades, from about 2.5 hours a day with friends in 2003 to only about 40 minutes a day in 2020. The pandemic poured fuel on a long-burning fire of disconnection. It wasn't just the quantity of social interactions, the quality changed as well. Deprived of face-to-face contact, people turned even more to social media, forums, and partisan media to fill the void. Physical isolation became fertile ground for digital misinformation. The World Health Organization warned of an infodemic, a flood of false claims spreading faster than the virus itself. We're not just fighting a pandemic, we're fighting an infodemic, said WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus in early 2020. Indeed, wild rumors proliferated that COVID was caused by 5G towers or that drinking bleach could cure it. Bogus cures like eating garlic spread across Facebook. Scammers push miracle supplements. Anti-vaccine propagandists seized the moment. It became a perfect storm. A frightened population, stuck online, bombarded by conflicting information and conspiracy theories. Worse, even basic facts became politicized. In this charged environment, public health measures, such as masks, vaccines, closures, turned into political litmus tests. Whether one believed COVID was a deadly hoax, or whether one trusted doctors or internet quacks, started to more align with partisan identity. A stark example, the drug hydroxychloroquine became a flashpoint in 2020. Early in the pandemic, some claimed it was a miracle cure for COVID-19. Scientists urged caution, however, citing lack of evidence. But soon, whether you believed hydroxychloroquine was effective rested strongly on one's political persuasion, a radical politicization of the truth, as observers noted. Many conservatives, following certain media figures, became convinced of the drug's benefits despite scientific studies to the contrary. Many liberals reflexively scorned it. It was no longer about data, it was about tribal narrative. This was a microcosm of America's fractured reality. Even science was being viewed through red or blue glasses. Misinformation took real lives. Some Americans consumed toxic home remedies touted online. Others refused vaccines or masks because they distrusted mainstream information, only to fall gravely ill. By one estimate from the Surgeon General, COVID-19 misinformation was directly linked to thousands of deaths in the US. For instance, people rejecting life-saving vaccines due to these false fears. The pandemic's body count was not only a failure of medicine, but a failure of communication and trust. During those lonely months, social trust hit new lows. We lost trust in institutions such as government, health authorities, and media, and often in each other. Compliance with guidelines varied wildly. Mutual suspicion and even violence erupted over something as simple as wearing a mask in a grocery store. A spring 2020 Pew survey found only 27% of Americans trusted the federal government to do the right thing most of the time, near an all-time low. By 2021, public confidence in the CDC and other health agencies had been deeply shaken amid political interference and swirling conspiracy theories. Socially, people became more anxious, depressed, and on edge. Mental health surveys showed spikes in anxiety and depression during pandemic lockdowns, especially among young adults. The Surgeon General later warned of a loneliness epidemic with serious health consequences exacerbated by COVID isolation. Remember, this came atop the existing trend where younger generations were already more depressed, a trend likely linked to heavy social media use and fewer in-person interactions. The pandemic was an accelerant, turbocharging these underlying fires. Politically, the stage was set for an explosion. 2020 was also an election year in the US, and one of the most divisive in memory. In the fog of the infodemic, partisan media and opportunistic actors sowed doubt about the election's integrity even before votes were cast. After the result, a dangerous false narrative took hold among millions of Americans that the election was stolen. Here, the collapse of our shared reality reached its most perilous consequence. Despite no evidence of any outcome-changing fraud, a December 2020 poll found roughly 66% of Republicans believed the election was stolen from President Donald Trump. Belief in this so-called big lie was fueled by viral misinformation on social media, echoing Trump's own baseless claims. By early 2021, about 3 in 10 Americans overall, roughly 29%, subscribed to the stolen election narrative. 2/3 of one political tribe were convinced of a completely false reality, utterly rejected by the other tribe. A democratic society cannot function when there is no agreement on who legitimately holds power. On January 6, 2021, these parallel realities collided violently. A mob of angry citizens, many driven by QAnon conspiracy theories and the quote-unquote big lie, stormed the US Capitol to overturn the election results. They attacked police, smashed windows, and for a brief moment occupied the seat of American democracy, believing in their hearts that they were patriots, saving the nation from a vast fraud. In truth, they had been misled by a flood of lies. One rioter famously proclaimed, streaming live on social media, "We're in the Capitol, baby," as lawmakers fled for their lives. It was the culmination of years of erosion in our shared reality. When roughly 60 to 70% of one party deems an election illegitimate, when nearly 1 in 5 Americans subscribes to an outlandish conspiracy theory like QAnon, the result is political violence. The Capitol attack was an embodiment of how far apart our truths had drifted. Even after that dark day, the underlying divides only hardened. Surveys in 2023 showed 63% of Republicans still believe the 2020 election was stolen. And disturbingly, support for political violence has also risen. An October 2023 PRRI Brookings survey found 23% of Americans, almost 1 in 4, agree that because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save our country. 2 years earlier, that figure was 15%. Among Republicans, 33%, 1 in 3, endorsed the potential need for violence in 2023, a marked increase from 2021, when nearly a third of the nation is flirting with political violence. The fabric of democracy is in tatters. It signals a collapse of trust so complete that some only feel they can achieve their vision of saving the country through violence. Let's pause and absorb this. After all the economic progress, technological marvels, and democratic traditions, we've arrived at a point where a significant chunk of Americans do not trust elections, do not trust each other, and even contemplate bloodshed as a solution against their fellow countrymen. How did we get here? It's not one cause, but rather a convergence of factors we've now explored. Decades of fraying community bonds, the rise of hyper-partisan and algorithm-driven media, the commodification of outrage, the isolation and trauma of the pandemic, and the deliberate exploitation of divisions by those seeking power or profit. The consequences are visible in every headline. Government paralysis, street protests and clashes, hate crimes and extremist violence are at an all-time high. Families are divided over facts versus alternative facts, and there's a pervasive sense of despair lingering about our future. In a 2024 poll, 81% of American voters across party lines said that they felt our democracy is under serious threat. Many specifically pointed to media and social media as among the serious threats, right alongside extreme political factions. It speaks volumes that almost half the country views the information system itself as a danger to democracy. Modern political dysfunction, rising social violence, and emotional radicalization are not isolated problems, but rather interconnected symptoms of what one scholar called structural neglect and digital chaos. Our society neglected the social infrastructure, such as community centers, local journalism, and civic education, that once helped produce a shared understanding. In the chaos of the digital public sphere, bad actors, both foreign and domestic, have free rein to spread falsehoods and amplify hatred. Elite figures in politics and media exploit these rifts by casting the other side as enemies, knowing it boosts their followers' loyalty. As Professor Jennifer McCoy notes, when political leaders paint opponents as an existential threat, it locks society into us versus them camps and sets the stage for democratic breakdown. Each side comes to view the other as not just wrong, but evil and dangerous. At that point, any means, even undemocratic ones, seem justified to stop the other. This is exactly what we see. Many Americans tolerating anti-democratic behavior from their side if it keeps the hated other side out of power. So here we are, a country without a shared reality, drifting apart into tribes with incompatible worldviews. Is all hope lost? Not necessarily. History shows that societies can recover their balance even after these dark periods, but it requires understanding of what went wrong and having the will to fix it. In our final chapter, we will look at how we might begin to restore our shared reality and rebuild the connections that have been torn. America has faced profound challenges before to its unity and been able to emerge even stronger. The very fact that we recognize the current collapse of shared reality means that we can chart our way out. First, experts emphasize rebuilding social capital from the ground up. Robert Putnam, after diagnosing America's civic decline in Bowling Alone, also highlighted ways to revive community. One key is fostering what he calls bridging social capital, connections that link people across diverse social divides. It's not enough to bond in homogenous groups, such as a church with people just like you or in online forums of the like-minded. We need bridges that bring different kinds of people together. Successful examples in the past included broad-based movements and civic organizations that united people of different classes, races, and viewpoints. Putnam likened bonding social capital to sociological superglue and bridging social capital to sociological WD-40, the lubricant that allows a society to function smoothly despite differences. Rebuilding local clubs, volunteer initiatives, and community events that mix different folks is a starting point. When you bowl in a league or attend a town hall, you meet neighbors as people, not as abstract avatars. Those human ties cultivate empathy and trust. There are also growing calls to rein in the excesses of both big tech and the algorithmic chaos. This means both regulation and transparency. Governments have begun considering measures to regulate social media algorithms, for example, requiring platforms to allow users to see a chronological feed or to opt out of personalization of ads. Lawmakers are also scrutinizing the amplification of harmful content. In 2021, former Facebook employee Frances Haugen testified that Facebook's algorithm was literally fanning ethnic violence in some countries and fueling teen depression. These revelations spurred talks of tighter oversight. While we cherish free expression, experts note that freedom does not mean anarchy of automated outrage. Many scholars and even some tech insiders argue that social media's virality engine needs guardrails because it is incompatible with democracy when it's left unchecked. Possible steps include stronger content moderation of blatant falsehoods and hate, reducing algorithmic promotion of extremism, and breaking up or tightly regulating tech monopolies to reduce their power over information flows. Europe has already moved in this direction with laws like the Digital Services Act. The US is also debating its own approach. Surveillance capitalism itself is being challenged. There are pushes to strengthen privacy laws, letting people control how their data is used, and to ban the most exploitative practices of data brokerage. The idea is to shift from a model that treats people as a data point back to treating people as citizens with rights. Shoshana Zuboff advocates a fight for a human future, where our digital architectures are redesigned for human welfare and not just profit. That could mean tech platforms designed more like public utilities or cooperatives, accountable to users and the public interest. Crucially, we need to continue investing in trusted public information. We need common points of reference again. Quality journalism, science communication, civic education. Reviving local news is one part. Studies show communities with strong local newspapers have more informed citizens and less polarization in local politics. Public libraries and schools can serve as bulwarks against misinformation by teaching media literacy, how to discern credible sources, and how to spot falsehoods. There are efforts to integrate media literacy programs for students and the public so that fewer people fall prey to conspiracies and hoaxes. Solutions like middleware or user-controlled filters to let individuals choose how to moderate their social media feeds rather than leaving it solely to corporate algorithms, and projects to promote cross-partisan dialogue online, deliberately connecting people who disagree under moderated, respectful conditions. These are like digital bridge-building exercises, the virtual equivalent of a town hall. While their scale is small, they demonstrate that the internet doesn't have to be a dystopia. Design choices make a difference. Ultimately, leaders will need to step up. As one Georgetown University poll found, an overwhelming 88% of Americans, including strong majorities of both parties, believe that if leaders of different parties work together and seek compromise, it would help lower political divisions. People are hungry for cooperation and sanity. The public, for all the polarization, largely wants practical solutions and less chaos. Political figures who rise above the fray, who reject the easy path of demonizing the other side, can find a receptive audience. The poll showed hope that finding common ground on issues from both the budget to the healthcare is not only possible, but desperately desired by most citizens. And us, as individuals, healing a shared reality isn't just top down, but bottom up. It may sound simple, but reaching out in our own lives across divides is powerful. Make the effort to talk with, not at, people you disagree with, not through Facebook comments, but genuinely, perhaps over coffee. Build or rebuild those personal bridges. Remember that behind the caricatures of red and blue are human beings with stories and concerns that often overlap. Restoring faith that we share something, a community, a nation, a destiny, begins face to face, in trust built one conversation at a time. Experts in conflict resolution note that focusing on common goals and values can rebind a society. Most Americans, for instance, share core values like wanting safety for their families, economic opportunity, freedom to live as they choose. Emphasizing those shared aspirations rather than the wedge issues can open room for consensus. For example, whether Democratic or Republican, almost everyone agrees that infrastructure, such as roads and broadband, need to be improved, that veterans should be cared for, that corruption is bad. Starting from areas of agreement helps rebuild a working shared reality. It sounds basic, but after years of zero-sum framing, if they win, we lose, it is a needed reset. There are encouraging signs. In towns across America, some local civic groups and bridge organizations have formed, bringing liberals and conservatives together for service projects or dialogues, reminding people that we can disagree without dehumanizing. On the internet, the very same tools that spread misinformation can be used to spread accurate information faster if we empower trustworthy sources and flood the zone with facts, as the WHO attempted during the infodemic by partnering with tech firms. And a new generation, Gen Z, while facing mental health struggles, is also more diverse and often more adept at navigating digital spaces. Many young activists focused on positive change, like combating climate misinformation or advocating for ethical tech. The challenges are enormous, and there are no illusions there. We didn't arrive at this fractured state overnight, and we won't fix it quickly. But the path forward is illuminated by what we've learned. We know that unregulated algorithms and unchecked lies are recipes for disaster, so we fact-check and regulate. We know that isolation breeds extremism, so we reconnect in person when possible. We know that when people feel heard and valued, they are less likely to fall into cynical anger, so we create forums where every community member can voice concerns and see action follow. Finally, as the subtitle of Putnam's book reminds us, there can be a revival of American community. In our history, times of crisis have often prompted renewal. The Great Depression led to new social compacts. The turmoil of the 1960s was followed by reforms expanding rights and representation. Perhaps this era of shared reality collapse can spur a moment to rebuild a shared foundation, a modern push for civic renewal and digital responsibility. In the end, restoring a shared reality comes down to something very human: trust. Trust is hard to gain and easy to lose. We've lost a lot of it in our media, in our institutions, and in each other. To get it back, each of us has to be a part of the solution. Demand transparency and truth from those in power. Reward media outlets that play it straight and factual. Be willing to update your own beliefs when presented with credible evidence. And give your neighbor the benefit of the doubt once in a while, even if their yard sign or Facebook posts make you furious. We have to relearn how to assume goodwill. America has reinvented itself before when faced with new frontiers. The internet was a new frontier that we entered without a map. And now we've seen the pitfalls, but also the promise. The same connectivity that tore us apart could, if harnessed differently, help knit us together across vast differences, and it's up to us to insist on that better future. This has been Signal Lost. It has been about facing some uncomfortable facts, but in shining a light on them, we honor the first step toward change, seeing clearly. The collapse of shared reality is not just an American problem. It's a human problem in the digital age. Yet I firmly believe we can reclaim this signal. The empathy, the reason, the solidarity, those qualities that define the best of humanity are still here. To the viewer who feels disoriented by modern life, you are not alone, and it is not hopeless. We can rebuild our common ground. We can revive community, reform technology, and revitalize the truth. Clarity is possible. Connection is possible. The work ahead will not be easy, but it's necessary for our democracy, for our neighborhoods, and for our very souls.